It was on our 10th anniversary that I discovered the secret my son and husband had been keeping from me. I realized it wasn't a coincidence that incidents always occurred on our anniversary. In truth, my own son orchestrated them to ensure I wouldn't interrupt my husband's meetings with his first love. That afternoon, I stood outside the door and overheard the clear voice of my son, whom I loved so dearly, saying, "Dad, go see Miss Granados. As always, I'll make sure to keep Mom occupied. Every year, it's the same thing, and I'm tired of it. It's all Mom's fault. She's not so young anymore. Why does she insist on celebrating her anniversary with you? Dad, I want Miss Granados to be my mom. She wouldn't be as melodramatic as my mom." That very day, I asked my husband for a divorce when he came home late, carrying the faint scent of an unfamiliar perfume. They both seemed to forget that I am not just a wife and a mother, but also an independent woman. Hearing those words through the door felt like being plunged into an icy abyss. In my shock, the cup I was holding slipped from my hand. The hot milk spilled across the floor, some of it burning my skin. Crack! The door opened from the inside. My son, Emilio Reyes, looked at me, and I noticed a flicker of panic in his eyes before he let out a growl. "What are you doing? Eavesdropping again? Dad's right, you always sneak around like we're criminals." Despite being only 8 years old, Emilio was already quite tall. Not only did he physically resemble Carlos Reyes by 50%, but he also carried the same cold temperament as his father. Seeing Emilio's disdainful scowl, I was reminded of the way Carlos used to look at me when he lost his patience. Upon further reflection, I realized that Carlos had never truly been patient with me. I had simply failed to notice. My emotions surged, and for a moment I wanted to argue or demand explanations, but it felt futile. Forcing a smile, I told Emilio, "I just got here, I almost fell. I didn't hear anything, really." Emilio eyed me with suspicion. Seeing no signs of anger, he scoffed, "Clean up this mess. Where's my hot milk?" I crouched carefully to pick up the shards of broken glass, trying to hold back the tears threatening to spill. A profound sense of helplessness overcame me. "I'll ask Maria to prepare your milk," I said. "I'm feeling a bit tired." Hearing this, Emilio grew angry and accused me. "I know you're upset because I'm sick today, and that ruined your plans to go out with Dad. Can you stop being so selfish? Preparing my milk is your job. How would Maria know the exact temperature I like?" Emilio had digestive issues, so I always prepared his milk at precisely 113 degrees Fahrenheit. I cared for him in every way, and yet he called me selfish. I continued cleaning without shedding a tear. Then I stood up and left without looking at him. Behind me, I heard him slam the door shut. Back in my room, I turned on my computer, searched for a divorce agreement template, and began drafting my own. Just then, a breaking news story appeared on the screen, featuring photographs of Carlos Reyes, CEO of Grupo Reyes, dining with his childhood sweetheart. It seemed he had been so distracted he didn't notice the reporters. In the photo, he and a charming woman smiled at each other. I had never seen him smile so sincerely. The woman looked radiant, as delicate as a porcelain doll. Meanwhile, the mirror beside me reflected my tired, expressionless face. Our marriage had been arranged by our families, leaving us little choice. I had tried to resist, but it was futile. In the end, our wedding was rushed due to unexpected circumstances, forcing him to give up his first love. I still remember the day he promised me he would focus on our married life. I believed him. So for the 10 years we had been together, I dedicated myself entirely to my role as a housewife. Day after day, I took care of Emilio, managed the household chores, and let my vitality and beauty fade, consumed by the routine. Suddenly, the printer stopped working, and the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. I recognized Carlos's voice, impatiently asking, "Where's Lucia?" At that very moment, the divorce agreement finished printing. I took it in my hands and left my room. In the living room, Maria and the other staff stood with their heads lowered, visibly uncomfortable. In front of them, Carlos gently patted Emilio on the back. Emilio had been coughing for a while, his face flushed red. Carlos, who usually wore a cold expression, was seething with barely contained fury. His eyebrows were drawn together in a stormy scowl. When he saw me descending the stairs, his glare turned sharp, and he addressed me in a bitter tone. "Do you know the hot milk Emilio drank made him sick? How hard was it to prepare his milk like always? Why would you leave it to someone else? If I were as irresponsible at work as you are at home, I'd have gone bankrupt long ago." I glanced at Carlos's immaculate suit, perfectly tailored, not a wrinkle in sight, every detail coordinated with precision. I gave a bitter smile. Carlos rarely spoke to me at length, unless it was to scold me, as he was doing now. To be fair, in the early days of our marriage, we had shared some good moments. Carlos had a reserved personality, rarely expressing emotion or affection, but he had always been materially generous. He treated me with respect and gave me my due in public. Though there was no love between us, at least we maintained a cordial relationship. With Emilio's arrival, our bond seemed to grow closer. Carlos even began smiling more often. During my postpartum recovery, he managed to take a break from work to care for me. I admit, at the time I was touched. I decided then to devote myself completely to our home. The more I focused on taking care of Carlos and Emilio, the more exhausted I became. Now I understand that he never loved me. He simply fulfilled the role expected of a husband. The initial concern that had once moved me turned over the years into an authoritarian attitude. His genuine affection had always been reserved for the woman he left behind in his youth. With this realization, the criticisms I once tolerated became unbearable. Even seeing him and Emilio sitting on the sofa, both wearing identical severe expressions, filled me with aversion. I sat in a single armchair to the side, watching them. Carlos, noticing my silence, grew even more frustrated. He slammed his fist on the table, his face darkened, and raised his voice, trying to contain his anger. All this over a simple anniversary, and you take it out on Emilio. Lucia, you're such a melodramatic woman. For a moment, my heart ached, but I refused to let my expression change. I placed the divorce agreement on the table and slid it toward him. Take a look, sign it if you agree. Carlos's speech came to an abrupt halt. First, he looked at the document in surprise, then in anger, and finally with an air of indifference. He crumpled the pages and tossed them into the trash bin beside him. I understand that you're in a bad mood today, and that's why you're doing this, but I'll give you time to think it over. If tomorrow you're still set on getting a divorce, I'll gladly give you what you want. I'll gladly give you what you want. The words echoed in my mind, making my heart tremble. It seemed he had wanted this for a long time but hadn't wanted to admit it. His anger stemmed from the fact that I had taken the initiative, putting him in an uncomfortable position. Carlos turned and stormed out, leaving in anger, while Emilio ran after him. "Dad, wait for me! Mom has gone too far," Emilio shouted. "You have to teach her a lesson." After they both left, Maria cautiously approached me. "Mrs. Reyes, would you like me to talk to Mr. Carlos and explain that you weren't feeling well? With an apology, he and young Emilio would forgive you immediately." I looked at her with irony, letting out a bitter laugh. "Emilio is already 8 years old. He's not a baby. I've made everything clear. I want a divorce from Carlos. From now on, I don't care what they do." After saying that, I went to my room and began packing my things. I only took the jewelry my mother had left me and the clothes I had bought for myself. I fit everything into a single suitcase and left the house without looking back. Carlos must have found out quickly because that same night he called me 3 times, a very unusual thing for him. I didn't answer a single call. Instead, I sent him a screenshot of the news article that still hadn't been taken down from the internet. Instantly, he stopped calling. 5 minutes later, it was Emilio's name flashing on the screen. Despite his young age, Carlos and I had decided to get him a phone for safety reasons. Emilio, who inherited his father's intelligence and self-control, used it sparingly. I remembered that when he first got his phone, he saved my number in his contacts and even updated the emergency contact on my phone, telling me with a serious face, "Mom, if you're ever in danger, call me. I'm a man, and I can protect you just like Dad." Lost in that memory, I answered the call. Immediately, I heard Emilio's childish yet furious voice. "Lucia, you're a liar. You were eavesdropping. That's not fair. If I'm okay with Dad seeing Miss Granados, why are you mad at me? Why do you have to take it out on him?" "What did you call me?" I asked, my heart sinking. "A liar. If Dad goes out with Miss Granados, that's his business. You're the one being jealous for no reason. If you want us to forgive you, you need to apologize to Dad and Miss Granados. Then I'll act like nothing happened. For me, you'll still be my mom." I stayed silent for a moment, smiling bitterly as I felt my heart fill with needles and an icy numbness paralyze me inside. Emilio, my son, my own flesh and blood, was taking someone else's side. With a trembling voice, I tried to hold back my tears. "Emilio, I'm not going to apologize. I also don't want to keep being your mom. I'm set on divorcing your dad. From now on, we'll be complete strangers." "Fine!" he shouted angrily, his voice carrying the stubborn determination of a child. "Because I don't want you to be my mom either. I hope you keep your promise." With an abrupt click, he hung up. After the call ended, I stared at my phone in silence. The tears I had held back for so long began to fall uncontrollably. I wasn't crying for Carlos nor for the betrayal. I was crying for the cruel reality that my own son, my blood, had called me a liar and chosen to defend his father's mistress. That night, I checked into a modest hotel in the city center. As I looked out at the city lights through the window, I replayed every moment when I had prioritized my family's needs over my own. 10 years spent ensuring Emilio's milk was at the perfect temperature, coordinating every detail of the household, and being the perfect wife Carlos needed to maintain his pristine corporate image. My phone kept buzzing with messages and missed calls. Most were from Maria, our housekeeper, insisting that everything could be resolved with a simple apology. There were also messages from Carlos's mother, reminding me of my duties as a wife and mother. What hurt the most were the photos that started circulating on social media. Carlos and Miss Granados dining together at various restaurants over the past few months. Each image was like a stab to my heart, confirming years of lies and deceit. At 3 a.m., when the silence of the night was deafening, I received one final message from Carlos. Lucia, your childish behavior is affecting Emilio. He has a fever and keeps asking for you. If you truly care about our son, come home and we can discuss this like adults. Miss Granados is just an old friend, and your jealousy is creating unnecessary drama. I read the message several times, feeling anger rise within me. It was the same pattern of manipulation Carlos had used for years, making me feel guilty for his own faults, using Emilio as a shield, minimizing his actions while magnifying my flaws. But something had changed in me. Maybe it was hearing my son conspire against me, or perhaps it was seeing those photographs that confirmed what my heart already knew. Instead of replying, I opened my laptop and began researching. First, I looked up my rights in a divorce. Then I reviewed professional development programs in business administration, the career I had abandoned for marriage. As the night wore on, I crafted a detailed plan. This wouldn't be revenge born of hatred, but a transformation driven by dignity. Carlos Reyes might have his business empire, but I would reclaim something far more valuable, my identity. At dawn, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Clara, a former university classmate who now ran a prominent consulting firm. Lucia, I just saw the news about Carlos and that woman, she said bluntly. I followed your story from afar for years, watching how that marriage consumed you. I have a proposal for you. That call would be the first step toward my professional rebirth, though I didn't realize it at the time. Clara offered me not just a job, but an opportunity to regain everything I had lost. My confidence, my independence, my worth as a professional. As the sunlight began to fill the hotel room, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. I wouldn't respond to Carlos's manipulations. I wouldn't beg for Emilio's love. I wouldn't apologize for discovering the truth. Instead, I would channel all that pain into something greater than myself. I opened my email and composed 2 messages. The first was to my lawyer requesting an urgent meeting to begin divorce proceedings. The second was to Clara, accepting her offer and proposing a time to discuss the details. In that moment, I remembered my mother's words before she passed. Daughter, self-love isn't selfishness, it's survival. For the first time in 10 years, I truly understood what those words meant. Meeting Clara felt like a jolt of awakening after a long slumber. Her office, located in the heart of the financial district, was everything I had dreamed of before marrying Carlos. Modern, professional, vibrant. Clara hadn't changed much since university. She was still the same direct and determined woman I remembered. Lucia, I'll be honest with you, she said, pouring coffee into a mug that read, Success is the best revenge. I followed you on LinkedIn all these years. I saw how your profile stagnated while the rest of us moved forward. Every time I saw Carlos at corporate events, I wondered why one of the brightest students of our generation had disappeared from the professional map. Her words, though harsh, were exactly what I needed to hear. Clara explained that she was expanding her consulting firm and needed someone to lead a new project, a financial empowerment program for women navigating difficult divorces. Who better than you, she continued. You know the corporate world through your connection to Carlos, you understand the pain of being marginalized, and you have the academic training necessary. You just need to get back up to speed. As we discussed the details, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. It was Carlos's mother. Excuse me, I said, declining the call. It's my husband's family. They're not handling the situation well. Clara smiled knowingly. You know, when I got divorced 5 years ago, my mother-in-law organized a family intervention. Her words, laced with humor and experience, made me feel less alone. This wasn't just about reclaiming my career, it was about reclaiming myself. They thought I was destroying the family by wanting a career. Now, I run one of the most successful consulting firms in the city. That afternoon, as I left Clara's office, I received a message from Maria. Senora, young Emilio hasn't eaten all day. Mr. Carlos is furious and is threatening to sue you for abandonment. I froze in the middle of the sidewalk. The urge to run back home to fix everything with an apology was almost overwhelming. But then I remembered Emilio's voice calling me a liar, the photos of Carlos with Miss Granados. Lucia Vega, I corrected myself, reclaiming my maiden name. I called my lawyer immediately. I want to begin divorce proceedings right away, and I need protection from any accusations of abandonment. Laura, my lawyer, was methodical and direct. She explained that Carlos would likely use his influence and resources to complicate the process. She also warned me about the custody of Emilio. Given his age and the circumstances, the judge will likely consider his opinion. And from what you've told me, your son seems firmly on his father's side. Those words hurt more than any legal threat. However, as Laura outlined legal strategies, my mind was already working on a different plan. If Carlos wanted a fight, he would have one, but on my terms. That night, I returned to the hotel and began preparing my presentation for Clara. As I researched cases of women rebuilding their lives after divorce, an email from an unknown address appeared in my inbox. Dear Lucia, I know you must hate me, and you have every right to, but there are things about Carlos you need to know. Things that could help you in the divorce. If you're willing to listen, I'd like to meet with you. Sincerely, Mariana Granados. My first impulse was to delete the email, but something stopped me. Perhaps it was the chance to uncover the full truth, to gain an advantage in the battle ahead. I replied briefly, tomorrow, 9 a.m., Cafe Milano. Come alone. As I scheduled the meeting, another message from Carlos arrived. Emilio is in the hospital. His asthma attack worsened. Is this what you wanted to achieve with your tantrum? The world seemed to stop for a moment. Guilt and fear threatened to suffocate me, but then I remembered something Clara had said during our meeting. Sometimes, the greatest love you can show your children is teaching them that their mother is a whole person, not just a role in their lives. With trembling hands, I replied, send me the name of the hospital. I'll be there in 20 minutes. It was time to face my son, not as the submissive mother I had been, but as the woman I was becoming. Part 3. Truths that set you free. San Angel Private Hospital was yet another reminder of Carlos's power. The staff seemed to know him, and the glances they gave me as I walked toward Emilio's room were a mixture of curiosity and judgment. I stopped in front of room 507, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. Emilio was asleep, connected to a nebulizer. He looked so small and fragile in that hospital bed that for a moment, I forgot all the pain of the past few days. Carlos sat beside him, his suit wrinkled for the first time in years. Well, you decided to show up, he murmured without looking at me. The doctor says it was an anxiety attack that triggered the asthma crisis. Are you satisfied? Before I could respond, Emilio opened his eyes. When he saw me, his face twisted into a mask of hostility far beyond his age. What is she doing here? He asked his father as though I were invisible. I said I didn't want to see her. Emilio, I began, stepping closer to his bed. I'm your mother, and... No, he shouted, ripping off the nebulizer mask. You're not my mother anymore. Mothers don't spy on conversations. Mothers don't abandon their children. Mothers don't ruin everything. His breathing grew labored again, and a nurse rushed in at the sound of his cries. She asked me to leave the room while they tried to calm Emilio. In the hallway, I found myself face to face with Miss Granados. She was wearing an elegant, tailored suit and holding a bouquet of flowers. When she saw me, her face went pale. Lucia, Mariana whispered, visibly uneasy. I didn't expect to see you here. About our meeting tomorrow. I cut her off, motioning toward the hospital's cafe. Now, in the nearly empty cafe, Mariana Granados turned out to be very different from the image I had built in my mind. She wasn't the seductive homewrecker I had imagined, but a woman carrying her own scars. Carlos and I aren't lovers, she began, stirring her unsweetened coffee. At least, not in the way you think. I'm a private investigator specializing in corporate fraud. She showed me her identification and continued. 2 years ago, the board of Grupo Reyes hired me. There were suspicions of money laundering and embezzlement. Carlos isn't the exemplary businessman everyone thinks he is. Each word was like another piece of a puzzle I never knew existed. Mariana explained how Carlos had been funneling millions into offshore accounts and manipulating the company's financial records for years.
Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I was already beginning to understand.
Because in 3 days, I'll present my final report to the board. Carlos is going to prison and his empire will collapse. You and Emilio need to be prepared. My head spun. Years of lies, not just about our family, but about the entire empire Carlos had built. Carlos suspects, Mariana continued. That's why he's been more present at board meetings. That's why he's intensified our public encounters, trying to frame it as an affair to discredit my investigation once it goes public. And Emilio? I asked, thinking of my son and his unwavering loyalty to his father. Carlos has been manipulating him, Lucia. He's been filling his head with lies about you for years. I have recordings. They're part of the investigation. I needed evidence of how Carlos uses people for his own ends. As Mariana spoke, my phone buzzed with a message from Clara. Where are you? I need to show you something urgent about the project. At that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't be a passive victim in this story.
Mariana, I said, straightening my posture, I need every detail you can give me about Carlos's finances. Not for revenge, but to protect my son's future.
She nodded, understanding. I'll send you everything I can legally share, but Lucia, be careful. Carlos is more dangerous than you think when he feels cornered.
As I walked back toward Emilio's room, I saw Carlos in the hallway, speaking heatedly on the phone. When he noticed me, he abruptly ended the call.
Emilio's asleep, he said flatly. The doctor says he can go home tomorrow. Good, I replied, feeling a newfound strength in my voice. Because we have a lot to discuss, Carlos. About the future, about the truth, and about all the lies you've been telling our son. His face tightened, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. The next morning, the business world was rocked by news of an investigation into Grupo Reyes. The article, published in the country's most prestigious financial newspaper, was just the tip of the iceberg. As I read the news on my tablet in the hospital waiting room, I watched Carlos pace frantically in and out of Emilio's room, making increasingly desperate phone calls. His perfect facade was crumbling. You! He pointed at me accusatorily when he saw me. What did you say to Mariana?
I stood slowly, meeting his gaze. Why? Are you afraid she's uncovered more than your financial misconduct?
His face paled. For the first time in our marriage, I saw the real Carlos Reyes, a frightened man whose life was built on lies.
You don't know what you're talking about, he hissed, stepping toward me threateningly. Everything we have, everything I've given Emilio, I built. And this is how you repay me? Conspiring with that woman? Conspiring? I repeated, with a calm I hadn't known I possessed. Like you conspired with our son to manipulate me for years? Like you conspired to embezzle millions from your company? Carlos froze, his expression a mix of rage and terror. His empire was collapsing, and for the first time, I wasn't the powerless wife he thought I was. At that moment, Clara appeared in the hospital hallway, her professional presence contrasting sharply with the chaos around us. Lucia, she called, deliberately ignoring Carlos. The board of directors is in session. They need your testimony. Carlos turned, confused. Testimony? What is she talking about? About this, I said, pulling a folder from my bag. My new contract as an external consultant for the restructuring of Grupo Reyes. It turns out that my experience as your wife has given me a unique perspective on certain irregularities in the company. Carlos's face twisted into a mask of fury. You wouldn't dare! Think about Emilio. I am thinking about Emilio, I replied. For the first time, I'm truly considering his future, not the fantasy you created. At that moment, the door to Emilio's room opened. Our son stood in the doorway, still in his hospital gown, his eyes filled with tears. Is it true, Dad? He asked in a trembling voice. Was everything you said about Mom a lie? Carlos froze. His phone, resting on a nearby desk, buzzed incessantly with calls from the board. Emilio, son, it's not what it seems, Carlos began, but the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted him. 2 men in suits appeared. Mr. Reyes, we're from the Anti-Corruption Bureau. We need you to come with us. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. I watched Emilio's face twist in pain and confusion. Carlos struggled to maintain his composure as he was escorted out of the hospital, and the nurses and patients watching the scene in stunned silence. Mom, Emilio whispered, his voice no longer filled with anger but fear and need. What's happening? I approached him, and for the first time in days, he didn't push me away when I hugged him. What's happening, I said softly, is that it's time you learn the truth. All of it. Clara stepped closer, discreetly. The board is waiting, Lucia, but I can tell them you need time with your son. I looked at Emilio, who clung to me as he had when he was little. No, I replied. It's time for Emilio to see who his mother truly is. Can you walk, son? There's an important meeting we need to attend together. As we walked toward the hospital exit with Emilio leaning on me and Clara leading us to her car, I felt as though I was taking the first steps toward true liberation. This wasn't just about getting revenge on Carlos or clearing my name. It was about showing my son that real strength lies not in power or money, but in integrity. The following months were a whirlwind of change. The Grupo Reyes boardroom, where I had once felt like an outsider during rare social events, became my second home. Alongside Clara and a team of specialists, I immersed myself in unraveling the complex web of deceit Carlos had woven over the years. Impressive, one of the directors remarked after my presentation on the irregularities we had uncovered. Ms. Vega, your internal knowledge of the company has been invaluable. Hearing my maiden name again felt strange at first, but it was becoming more natural with each passing day, more me. The Lucia who had once existed solely to ensure Emilio's milk was the perfect temperature was gone, and Emilio, now living with me in a smaller but cozy apartment, was processing everything in his own way. The first few weeks were tough. His emotions swung between anger, confusion, and guilt. One night, as I reviewed documents in my new home office, I found him standing at the door, clutching his pillow like he had when he was younger. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking, "can I ask you something?" I set my papers aside and made space for him on the sofa. He sat next to me, but he didn't meet my eyes. When Dad told me all those things about you, why didn't you defend yourself?" The question hit me like a wave, because I thought being a good mother meant sacrificing everything, even my dignity. I was wrong, son. A good mother also has to teach her children about self-respect. Emilio began to cry quietly. "I was horrible to you. I said terrible things." I put my arm around him, holding him close. "It's okay," I said. "We're learning together and we're going to be okay. And you're still here. You're still my mom." I hugged him tightly, feeling his tears soak through my blouse. "I will always be your mom, Emilio. But now I'm also Lucia Vega, the woman I was always meant to be." In the office, my financial empowerment project for women was taking shape. Clara had been right. My personal experience added a unique dimension to the initiative. "Your story inspires others," one client told me after a counseling session. "You show us that it's never too late to reclaim our identity." The legal case against Carlos progressed. The prosecutors had uncovered evidence of years of fraud. Miss Granados, Mariana, as I now called her, had become an unexpected ally. "You know what's ironic?" she said one day over coffee. "Carlos really thought he could manipulate me the way he did with you and Emilio. He never understood that women can be so much more than what he decides we should be." One day, while preparing a presentation for potential investors in my project, I received a call from the prison. It was Carlos. "Lucia." His voice sounded different, stripped of its usual arrogance. "I need to see you. For Emilio." "No," I responded calmly. "If you need something regarding Emilio, you can go through the lawyers. That's the only connection we'll maintain from now on." "Do you hate me that much?" he asked, a trace of bitterness in his tone. "No, Carlos, I don't hate you, but I don't need you anymore. Neither Emilio nor I." After hanging up, I gazed out the window of my office. The city stretched out before me, filled with possibilities. On my desk, a recent photo showed Emilio and me smiling at his last school performance. Beside it, my new degree in business administration gleamed proudly. The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Vega, the investors are here for the presentation." I stood, smoothed my suit, and smiled. It was time to show the world who Lucia Vega truly was. 5 years later. The auditorium at the convention center was packed. Hundreds of women, each with their own story of resilience, waited for the start of the annual conference. Rebirth, Women Transforming Lives. At the podium, Clara introduced me with evident pride. "And now, the founder and CEO of Phoenix Consulting, my dear friend and partner, Lucia Vega." Applause thundered as I stepped onto the stage. My navy blue suit, carefully chosen for the occasion, reflected the confidence I had built over the years. In the front row, Emilio, now a 13-year-old teenager, smiled at me with admiration.
5 years ago, I began. I was sitting in a hotel room thinking my life was over. My son hated me, my husband had betrayed me, and I had completely lost my identity.
I paused, letting the memory of those dark moments settle. But that night wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. The screens behind me displayed images of our work,
women regaining financial independence, rebuilding their careers, and healing their family relationships. Phoenix Consulting had become much more than a consulting firm. We were a movement of transformation.
True power doesn't lie in dominating others, I continued, but in reclaiming control of our own lives. Every woman in this room has the potential to be reborn, to turn pain into purpose. As I spoke, my mind traveled through the 5 years of change. Grupo Reyes had been completely restructured under new leadership. Carlos, serving his sentence, had tried multiple times to reconnect, but Emilio and I had chosen to maintain a healthy distance. My relationship with my son had transformed into something beautiful and authentic. No longer the manipulated child who parroted his father's words, Emilio had grown into a thoughtful and empathetic young man. Family therapy sessions had helped us both heal. "Mom," he had said recently, "do you remember how I used to measure the temperature of my milk?" I nodded, curious about where he was going. Now I understand it wasn't about the milk at all, it was about control. His words reflected not just his growth, but mine too. Together, we had learned that true strength comes not from perfection, but from resilience, self-respect, and the courage to start again. That realization had made me cry tears of joy. My son hadn't just healed, he had learned. Back in the present, I concluded my speech. 5 years ago, someone called me melodramatic for wanting to celebrate my wedding anniversary. Today, I celebrate a different kind of anniversary. 5 years of freedom, of growth, of true self-love, and most importantly, 5 years of showing my son that the true worth of a person isn't in their ability to submit, but in their courage to be authentic. The applause was deafening. As I stepped off the stage, Emilio ran to hug me. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he whispered in my ear. At that moment, my assistant approached discreetly. "Ms. Vega, Ms. Granados is on the line. She says it's about the new corporate fraud prevention program." I smiled. Mariana and I had developed an unexpected friendship. Her expertise in corporate investigations perfectly complemented our work in financial empowerment. "Ready for the celebratory dinner?" Clara asked, joining us. "More than ready," I replied, taking Emilio's hand. "But first, there's something I want to show you both." I led them to my office, where I had just hung a new picture. It was an enlarged photograph of the coffee mug Clara had served me during our first meeting, with the phrase, "Success is the best revenge." "You know, Mom," Emilio said, looking at the photograph, "I think you're wrong. Your success wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was self-love." I hugged my son, holding back tears. He was right. My true triumph hadn't been destroying Carlos or reclaiming my career. It had been reclaiming myself, and in the process, helping other women do the same. "Let's go to dinner," I said finally. "We have so much to celebrate." As we left the office, I glanced one last time at the photograph of the mug. I no longer needed it. The best revenge hadn't been success. It had been the inner peace I found in finally being true to myself.